Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion on including ELL families. We kindly request your attention for a brief moment in the spirit of transparency and the utmost respect for our community. We have some information we'd like you to read on this disclaimer screen. By taking a few moments to read through this disclaimer, you empower yourself with important information regarding the boundaries of our knowledge sharing environment. Please take just a moment also to read through this slide, and then together we're going to embark upon some exciting topics in early childhood education. All right, this expert of panel experts was created to provide real-world examples of how educators learn about and include the families of English language learners. All right, so the first thing we are going to do is introduce ourselves. And Yulia, if you will go first.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Yulia Summers. I've been teaching in the ELL education field, TESOL education field for the past 20 years. In the past 8 years, I've been teaching at University of Arizona Global Campus, or Ashford before that. I've taught a variety of teacher education courses. I'm fluent in both English and Spanish. Before that, I was a certified bilingual teacher in Dallas Independent School District. I mostly teach ELL related courses, linguistics courses, and I live in Dallas, Texas. That's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Lori?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Tess. I am adjunct professor here at UAGC. I'm also a recently retired elementary school teacher from Burlington, Wisconsin. And during that time, I was a reading specialist and an EL teacher. And although I'm not fluent in Spanish, I really picked up quite a bit over my years working with those students and their families. And I am really very passionate about supporting our ELs and their families. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
We're excited to have you here. So we wanted to ask, can you share an example of when you drew an incorrect conclusion about an English language learner's family? Julia, would you start?
Yes. What we know from research, I'll start a little bit from research. What we know from research is that your attitude towards ELLs or working with English language learners and their families may be either deficit or additive. And in the deficit view, ELLs and their families are usually viewed as problems, challenges, lacking talents, lacking resources. I've seen an article where teachers even said, oh, they don't even go to church. It was recently published. And so they have a deficit attitude towards English language learners and collaborating with these families. An additive view is a little different, and that's when you see ELLs and their families as having a value in the classroom. They bring some kind of different value to your classroom, such as, they have diverse learning experiences, diverse funds of knowledge, their talents and resources. And so when we work with ELL students, we either have the deficit perspective or the additive perspective. And I want you to kind of think about which perspective do you have. When I first started teaching and I knew little about ELLs, I maybe was on that deficit perspective where I was thinking, oh, they're not involved, they don't want to help, they don't want to participate. And so the reason later I found out, the reason they possibly refrained from involvement in the classroom, in the school activities, was possibly due to lack of language proficiency, lack of schooling that they had, lack of being able to help, or being in a challenging situation. And so that's an example where particularly me, I had an incorrect conclusion about the ELL families. We know from research that ELL students' communication styles, they vary, and the traditional family versus the culturally linguistically diverse family, they may bring different there are differences in the way they participate in the classroom. And maybe we'll touch a little bit about that later, but I'll let Lori respond to the question.
Okay, thank you. Yulia, I agree so much with you about the value that our EL families can bring to our schools. Like you, I had some pretty big misconceptions when I started. When I first started as an elementary school teacher, I worked at a small parochial school, and there was zero diversity, and I mean no diversity whatsoever. And then I took a position in our public school system as a reading specialist, and we had quite a bit of diversity in our district, and it continues to grow to this day. And when I first started, I was a reading specialist. And when we would have parent-teacher conferences, any support teachers that worked with that student needed to be present. So as a reading specialist, I was often at those conferences. And many of the EL students were in my reading intervention group. So that is why I attended those conferences. And the first few years I was there, as I was getting to know the EL population and learn about their families. Unfortunately, and I'm ashamed to admit, I did kind of buy into the assumptions that were put out there by my colleagues. And an example of that is having conferences and then our EL families not showing up for a conference time that was scheduled, or perhaps not even signing up for a conference time. And I remember my colleagues saying things like, with an eye roll, well, that doesn't surprise me, or they typically don't show up for these things. And like I said, I'm ashamed to admit I bought into that. But as I move forward with my license for EL, as I worked more with our EL students, and then as I became an EL teacher myself, I learned so much more about how much our families do want to be involved and how much they truly value education and respect teachers. And what I learned is that the responsibility was on us, and we were not providing what they needed to make it available for them to participate, to come to conferences. You know, Yulia, you mentioned the language barrier. You know, were we providing interpreters, translators for them? Were they getting things sent home in their home language? And the answer to that, unfortunately, was no. And so we worked really hard to change that. I think also we have to remember that different cultures have different expectations for schooling and participation in schooling. And I just learned so much. And like I said, I cringe when I think back to my thinking then, but it's all about learning and educating ourselves. And now it's our job to educate others, because I think it's really, really important not to make those assumptions.
Lori, I'm so glad that you were honest about that because I can say the same thing. And what both of you are saying is we need to check our bias and we need to learn about these families and provide for them what's best for each of them. And that means differentiating sometimes, right?
Right.
Okay, let's move on to our second question. And Yulia, you will go first. How do you include ELL families?
Um, Actually, I have like bullet points that I just kind of quickly want to go through. When you work in this English language learners, when you work with parents of English language learners, there are going to be some barriers. There are going to be some differences, and we've just talked about some of the differences. There could be cultural, communication norms that are not familiar to us. And so, I'll just go through the things you need to know when you include ELL families. You need to know how to initiate contact with parents of ELLs. You need to address those barriers to parental communication. I didn't mention in the first question how with the communication, a lot of times ELL parents, non-traditional families, they view school as something kind of like the communication can be two-way or one-way. And with the ELL families, it's often a one-way communication, where traditional families, you can have a two-way communication. And so you want to address those barriers to parental communication. You want to make sure you increase that meaningful participation of parents. I'll give you an example of activity, how you can do it meaningful with parents of ELLs. you want to create opportunities for parents to participate in a low risk environment. You definitely want to find out what their preferred language for communication is. Don't make assumptions. Just don't assume that that is the language they prefer talking, and identify. Use flexibility when providing for parent contact, and find out what resources are available. Perhaps there's some ESL classes available for parents. Um, Ensure that parents have received discipline plans from you, like dress codes, school policies. All of that needs to be in the home language if possible. And so that is very important, because I remember myself being in ELL and my parents receiving communication in a language they could not understand, and how difficult that made it for them and for me, because I had to translate whatever I could translate. So those are little tidbits that will make initiating contact and developing relationships with parents of ELLs a little bit more meaningful. And one way I have for you to include the families of ELL is activity called Cafecitos. That's just something we did in our school in Dallas, when I was a teacher in Dallas ISD. The Cafecitos is like little cups of coffee. It's kind of like an opportunity to open those lines of communication with parents, with grandparents, with legal guardians. It's just something you do in the morning, informal. You maybe first want to identify through the survey, the times that that are available, their needs, and then prepare an agenda, send it to the parents via email, or through the newsletter. Some of the topics for your agenda could include how to help students at home with homework, GED classes, ESL classes, how to transition to high school or to middle school, available community resources, volunteer opportunities. There are definitely a lot of topics to talk about. After school program opportunities. You want to provide a small snack or some beverage, and you want to vary those meetings, maybe the format of the meeting, maybe have like a presentation, parent discussion. It's just something we did, and it worked. It worked really well, because we had about 100 parents show up to those cafecitos every Monday. And I think it's just a great opportunity to connect with parents in an informal setting.
Yeah, usually I can ask, is that every Monday for the whole year?
No, it's once a month.
Okay. Awesome.
Mhm.
Okay. I love that.
All
That's
right.
all for you.
I love all those ideas, and I really almost kind of want to go back to my position now and say, let's do some of these. These are great ideas. Um, I think that the first thing we have to do is really look at our climate. What are parents seeing when they walk in the door? Who are they seeing? How are they greeted? Are there staff in the building who speak their language, or can find someone who does? As I stated before, a lot of the things that we had in our district were not being translated. Not only just things, newsletters home, but things that outside organizations were sharing, like extracurricular activities, things PTO did. Those are really important things. It's not just the school day that's important for these families, it's the extracurricular things. And so we worked really hard to make sure that at least we're working in that direction. One example that is almost a little frightening is when we have snow days, we would get an automated call, parents would, and it was in English. And I actually had parents text me at home saying, is there school today? And actually did have a couple of kids show up on snow days when there was no school. So thinking of all those things. And then I think, going back to what Yulia was saying earlier about that value added notion, our families have so much to offer, and they have this unique, our kids and their families have this unique background knowledge that can really bring value to our schools. The kids love learning about other cultures. So let's bring some of that into the classroom. in our district, we started having a yearly bilingual literacy night. We did huge things for Hispanic Heritage Month. We had started doing before school get-togethers for our EL families, allowing them to ask questions about the technology. Where do they find things? Putting together packets that are in their home language. There are so many things that we just take for granted that our English-speaking families have access to. And when we don't provide that for our EL families, how can we expect them to be involved and participate and feel like they're part of this community? And so we have to do everything we can to provide that for them.
I think this is wonderful to remember. We have to put ourselves in their shoes. If we went to another country and we could not understand anything, how would we fare? What would we want? So we have to make sure we do that. And I think that we do that for all families. I think that's important. Does anybody have anything that they want to wrap up with? We good? Okay. What an outstanding panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you and hope you will watch another panel soon.